We developed a community solar program. We introduced it to our board as far back as late 2015. And we developed the program over 2016 that I'm going to share with you today. And our emphasis was to be a utility that wanted to say yes when communities came to us with the need for solar. You know, we believe we have a partnership with all of you in the room in one way, shape, or form, and we want to enable anything that you, our partner communities, want to do. But we struggled on how do we get that message out, and it was more of a individual interest. So when Cliff approached us with this retail community solar summit, we thought, you know, what a great way to get as many interested communities into one area in one building to have that dialogue. I think it's critically important that we hear from you today. We have developed a program. It can evolve into something different, and I will explain to you how we developed it and why we developed it the way we did. But you're the communities that we're partners with. I need to hear from you, and I'm going to have a number of pauses as I go through this material to ensure that we're getting the feedback from you, and Pat will be scribing down any items that we need to follow up on. So kudos to Cliff and to Molly and the GenPro team to have a collective, in concert, little solar summit here so we can answer questions for our communities that are gathered here today. So, first off, this is just a community solar program. Molly's going to talk about our buy-sell energy rider, which we have in applications in communities today, and I'm sure she'll share that. This is our community solar program that we developed. And so what is it? It is not rooftop solar. This is something that you would drop in your communities that all residents, commercial, industrial, residential, can have access to. Okay? So it is a collective project for the community, no different than what you're going to see a little bit later this afternoon. We have other programs available for projects that are in place and are being talked about. I hear a lot of projects being discussed about wastewater treatment facilities and how you can remove some of the cost burden because of the high demand of those facilities. Aurora has put a project in like that, so I would encourage you, if you have interest, to talk to Rick in the city of Aurora. They're up and running, and he can share his experiences with you on how that works. So we enable all three types: behind the meter, net metering, which is rooftop, and community solar. We can enable every one of those activities to whatever your customer base wants. So what did we do? When we developed our program, we decided on 4 key principles we wanted to follow. First one, again, we want to be the utility that says yes. You as a community want something, we're going to find a way to make that happen. Okay? The second one is to limit the cost shift to those that are not participating. And why do I say that? NPPD's rate, as you all know, we have a socialized rate. Whatever you're paying in Chadron, people in Plattsmouth are paying the same thing. People in Loop City are paying the same thing. However, when it comes to solar projects, and specifically community solar, we felt, as did our board, that if Scottsbluff wanted to put a project in that raised our cost, that the residents of Loop City should not have to bear that decision that Scottsbluff made. Okay? So it was one of our guiding principles, and we were able to develop a program that said, if you put one in, any cost impacts would stay in that community. And we believe that's pretty sound practice. Is there questions around that? And I can talk to that a little bit more later on. Does that make sense to everyone? Paul?
If you, on the flip side of the coin, if there are benefits that are derived later, Do you just share with that particular community?
Excellent question. What Paul has asked, if there are benefits inside the community solar project, do they just stay in that community or are they socialized? And the answer is they just stay in that community. So that community takes the risk. They also just share the benefits right there in that community only. So, thank you. Any more questions around that one? Okay. The third one was it needed to be scalable. And we've developed a program for that. We have demonstrated that already. The Venango and Scottsbluff projects that went in were relatively small, 100 kW. And then the Kearney project went in at 5.7 megawatts. And the same program is used for both of them. So it's very scalable. So we've met that target. And it needed to be that way. The other thing is, the last one is, we wanted to make it simple. I know we bore you with utility speak a lot, and that's no good for any of us. So we really wanted to make it simple. So what I would share with you, when we went to develop our program, we canvassed the entire country on community solar programs. And I will tell you what we learned is that community solar programs vary as much as utilities vary, as much as communities vary. So you can set programs up the way you need to. And what we discovered was communities have set up programs that are beneficial for their customers and their utilities in concert with one another. And so that's what we attempted to do. And I'm going to buzz through this and get to the last slide here, because it fits better here on how we developed our program. We did conduct 2 focus group sessions. One was in Scottsbluff and one was in Kearney. They had expressed interest early on, so we went to those communities and got feedback from the customers. Okay? That helped shape our program. We also interviewed a lot of city managers and mayors, and what we heard resounding from our customers, you, was that do not impact the revenue stream that the lease payment provides to the cities. Okay? Net metering impacts the revenue stream going into the city because we cannot count that as sales, and that's how we calculate the lease payment. We developed our community solar program to ensure that it would not harm the revenue stream coming in from the lease payment provision. So we heard that loud and clear from our customers when we interviewed them.
How are you doing that?
Because I'll show you in the illustrated bill how that gets done. So, and I'll save it for that, good segue, but the question was, how are we doing that? And I told Bruce that I'll share that to him in one of our slides. So, as you've seen here, the board approved our program in July of 2017. Venango and Scottsbluff went live. That's a wrong date, it was 2016, but Venango and Scottsbluff went live in February 2017. Kearney went live February 1st. All those dates are wrong. I didn't do a very good check on any of that. Kearney is actually live today at theirs, and then we have seen a number of other communities express interest. Many of you are in the room today, and we'll get those dates corrected. Trying to get back to where I'm supposed to be, so bear with me. Okay, slide 4. The advantages. I put something together so you can understand some of the advantages that we see with our program. First is there's an avoidance of an upfront cost. How we work our program is we issue RFP for the project, work with the developer, and then land the project at the community. We don't ask the community then for any of the upfront costs to put the project in. NPPD and the developer enter into a power purchase agreement for the offtake of the energy that's produced, and then we market that in shares to the end-use customers in concert with the city. So there's no upfront capital cost in our community solar program that the communities would have to invest in. Economies of scale, typically the community solar projects can be put in for lower cost than piecemeal projects on rooftops, etc. Obviously, the larger the project, the lower the price point is going to drop. We've seen that across the industry, and as David had mentioned, the price point for solar continues to move downward. Any elimination of poor rooftop orientation, tree shading, any issues that you may have in your communities, whether there are covenants that would prohibit something like that, community solar gets all around that because we find a central location that the city wants to for its location of its project, and then we market the shares to any residents or businesses that want it from there. It eliminates all the taxes, insurance, inspections, anything that you would need and that the utility requires from electrical connections. Obviously, one project serves many residents, and in our view, it strengthens our relationship with our partner communities, and most importantly, what we heard, it does not impact your lease payment revenue stream. So, just a listing of advantages that we see if you would go the community solar route. There are other advantages to a buy-sell for behind-the-meter installations. Molly will probably touch on a few of those, but they're more specific to whatever load is behind that meter. So here's our program parameters. I would hope I generate a lot of questions here. So really open it up and please ask if nothing needs more clarification here. So eligibility. Almost every customer in your communities would be eligible for this. There are a few exceptions. Obviously, street lights, as I mentioned. We don't have batteries yet behind our community solar projects, so it'd be tough to serve a street light when the sun's not shining. Participation level, we've divided ours into shares. One share is the equivalent of 150 kWh. We decided on that because that's about the normal output of a standard solar panel. Give and take, depending on the capacity factor of the project, the sun location, etc. But in general, that's about what one standard panel would produce. So that's how we market it. That's one share. It's the equivalent of that. And we've changed the program. The maximum number of shares now you can buy is for 100% of your load. So we would determine, based on history, what your load would be, Roger, at your house. And if it's 1,000 kWh in 1 month, you'd be eligible for 6 shares, if I do the math right up in my head. But so you could get up to 100%. Now, again, they're broken into 150 kWh, so you're never going to match that exactly, and you can't exceed it. So you could buy up to the point where it would not exceed what the load is behind the meter. Is that clear? Okay. NPPD does reserve the right to limit the number of shares that are sold out. We maintain that in the rate schedule, depending on the size of the project. The reason it was put in, the Scotts Bluff project that went in first, we didn't want one commercial customer taking the bulk of the solar project, so it would limit the number of residents who could participate if they wanted to. However, that never became an issue, or it hasn't become an issue at Kearney because the size is so different. So depending on how big of a project you put in, it's unlikely we would use this provision. But it is there to protect and allow most of the customer base, if you're putting a community solar project in, to participate if they want to. The length of our program, it's very flexible. We heard that from our focus group meetings. They wanted to be able to get out if they didn't like it, so our program enables that. You only have to stay in it for 1 month, or you can stay in it for as long as the project is active and available. So that's up to choice. That was some of the stuff we heard from our customers as feedback, so we worked it into our program. We do have an enrollment fee to do all the back office legwork, get everyone enrolled. It's a $50 fee. That's the only upfront monies we ask of anyone who's participating in the program. That would be refundable if you stay in the program 3 years. You'll see a credit on your bill at the end of that. And that's just for us to get you logged into the program and do all the necessary billing setups. So, questions on the enrollment fee? Yes?
What happens to the shares that the community cannot get participating users to purchase?
Not sure I understand the question, Alan.
Let's say that we put in 300 kW solar garden, and that would amount to what? 200 shares.
Okay.
And Loop City only sells 150 of those shares.
Okay.
What happens to the remaining 50?
Okay. The question, I'm going to paraphrase, Alec, but what I think the question is the project goes in, we market the shares, and it does not get fully subscribed. Okay? What happens to the unsubscribed shares? Inside of our program, the community has to step up and back up those shares. Okay? That's where we hit the guideline that we don't want to shift costs to other customers. So we walk into your city councils and we explain our program that if you put in a 500 kW solar project, I don't know how many shares that the equivalent of that is, but it's probably close to 800 shares. If we don't get the project fully subscribed, then the city can assign the unsubscribed shares to any of its city load. Okay? And it can actually sign up, if it wants to, various city loads to the project and subscribe that way. But ultimately, if it's not fully subscribed, the city backs up the unsubscribed shares. That allows us not to shift that cost to the residents of Ravenna if they're not participating in a solar program. So, what you'll see in my illustration here is the actual cost of the Scottsbluff and Venango projects and what the additional cost the customer is obligated to pick up, or the city if the project isn't fully subscribed. Once the project gets fully subscribed, the risk of the city goes away, or any of that carrying cost. Obviously, the price is extremely important, because if the price is low enough, the risk becomes de minimis, or then it becomes a value at that point when it crosses over to what the energy supply cost is inside the retail rate. So,
A follow-up to that.
Yes.
Would be if we attracted a new business into town that had not established a usage history, could we sell those unsubscribed shares to that new entity, even though they didn't have an average kilowatt hour usage, monthly kilowatt hour usage?
Did everyone hear his question? Wants to know a new business comes into town, they have no history on load. would they be able to sell shares of the project to that new business? And the answer is yes. We would estimate what the load of that business would be based on a similar business. I'll just use a Subway for example. There's a lot of Subways around the state. We would know from other locations what the approximate load would be. That's just one example. We would find what would appear to be a similar load profile to the business that landed and use that as the estimate. Does that answer your question, Alec?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then finally, it's portable. Now, there's some limits on the portability. You have to stay within your community. But if you relocate in your community, you can take your share with you. If you move from McCook to Ogallala, and Ogallala doesn't have a community solar program, it would be pretty hard to transfer that because, as David said, these are community-based. That's what we heard from our focus groups. They want those in the community. They want to see that. They want to share that they're renewable, that they have a green angle, and it stays with the community. We could build a utility scale project and drop it somewhere and have a rate that says if you want to participate in a solar project, we have a rate for you. But what we heard from our communities in our focus group sessions is they want it in their community. And so it echoes what you heard earlier from David, that this is a grassroots type of program that we're here to enable. So, yes?
In the same, we all know people buy and sell and trade homes constantly. Is it, whose responsibility is it to, say for instance, the home sales, these people were on this, are the new people obligated, or can you, how does that work? Or is it eligible for somebody else?
The question is, if someone is participating in the program at a specific residence and they relocate, does the new purchaser of that residence, are they obligated to the share? And the answer is no. If the person who moves out of the community, the share goes back into an unsubscribed share. So the new homeowner has no responsibility. If the resident that moved relocated in the same community, they would have the option at that point to continue the program because you can get out within a month and carry that share with them if they so desired. So there is no obligation for someone moving into a new property to pick that up.
Who tracks it?
NPPD takes care of that. Now, we're going to get the notice when they say, I'm not living here anymore, would you terminate my electric service? We're going to have that right then and there. So, yes?
With the program length, the 1 month to get out of the program, is there any history in Nebraska or elsewhere over time where there are uncommitted shares because of people backing out of the program?
We haven't experienced it yet, but we're very new into this. The Scottsbluff and Venango programs have been up for just over a year. We have not had any of them turn their shares back.
And if that were to happen, that would be back on the city?
Yes, that's correct. So did everyone hear the question? So that's how that is set up. So good question, Orville, thank you.
I'll interject a little bit on that one because I believe there are waiting lists that you guys also have for some of those who were with people who weren't able to sign up the first time. So a lot of times if someone drops off or moves or goes off, then there'll be someone on that waiting list ready to take that share too. So there's that possibility.
Thank you, Molly, and she's correct. For the 2 projects we have in place, we do have a waiting list. Obviously, the project in Kearney is not fully subscribed, but there's 7,000 shares inside the Kearney project. So, other questions here on the program parameters?
Tim?
Yes.
So a wholesale customer of NPPD can do 10% renewable, 2 megawatts. Is there anything like that on this with retail? Do you have a maximum?
Okay. the question coming from Bruce is inside of our agreements we have with our wholesale customers, like Central City or Lexington as communities served at wholesale. The contract provides for a 10%, those communities are allowed up to 10% of their energy source from renewables. Retail is treated the same way. So what we've done is tell our communities they can go up to 10% of their load, because in aggregate, that's what we would have. So each community has a portion based on their load that can go up to 10%. Stands in the room, Mayor Carney. Carney's load is 106 megawatts. So Carney's share of a community solar program would be 10.6 megawatts. So, and we have the load profiles of every community in the room and every community that we serve, and that's where we go with that. So, does that get your question?
Yeah.
Excellent. Nice question. Thank you. Okay. Here we begin the discussion on how this is billed. So when a customer enrolls and purchases shares, they're going to be charged their regular rate. So if it's a residential customer and they sign up for, I'll just say 4 shares because that's the billing illustration I have on the next slide. We'll read the meter and charge them for their full use based on the residential rate. Then there'll be a line item on there for the power purchase cost of the solar project, and there'll be a line item for the credit of the base energy credit that NPPD's retail bill is comprised of. And I will show you that on the next slide. So there was a question earlier, how do you ensure that the revenue stream for the lease payment stays intact? This is how we accomplish that. So a big commercial customer that generates a large lease payment, they're eligible for the solar program. We're going to charge them their base rate, collect a lease payment on that, and that's how that goes. Now, the benefit of that, I'll show you in the illustration how that may be a credit to them when the solar PPA price point hits a certain spot, or NPPD's energy cost inside of its retail bill hits a certain spot. There's a crossover there, or couldn't be, or the PPA cost for the project may come in lower than our energy cost, and it becomes a value immediately. So that's how we determine that. So the second bullet talks about that. We have done inside of all the programs that we have instituted today is we've asked for fixed pricing on the PPAs, and I would say in general I think there's been a shift away from escalated pricing to fixed pricing. I'll let GenPro answer that more specifically because they deal with it. But the reason for that is through some of our experience through the wind projects with the escalators in there, it became very difficult for utilities to start chasing that. The other reason we did it is for the simplicity guiding principle. If we got solar projects with an escalated price, the initial price of the PPA is lower. I'm here to tell you it is lower, and it escalates over time. But then we also have to explain that to our customers. And it becomes very complicated very quickly when the escalation kicks in and they ask questions, well, why did my bill go up? And while it's explainable, we have taken the path of less resistance and went with fixed price structure. So all RFPs that we ask for in our community solar projects have a fixed price component. We're okay with the variable price component. We do the evaluation in the back office over 20, 25 years on the term to see what's more beneficial, but we will strongly side on the fixed price component for the simplicity factor. Questions on that? Okay, the next one talks about our base energy price. We do a cost of service study. every year for our retail business. So this is the only variable in the community solar rate. When we look at this every year right now, and for the year 2018, the embedded cost is 5.8 cents for the energy component of the bill. So if we would completely unbundle our bill to every increment, that would be the energy component of it. So what you'll see here on the next slide is an illustration of why that's important. But if the PPA price for a project falls equal to or below that, I think your project would fully subscribe immediately because it's lower energy cost, okay? Now, we haven't experienced that yet, but we may be in the near future. So that's what it is today. That price is looked at every year through our cost of service study. As you know, we haven't had a rate increase for 5 years, so it's been pretty steady. But it does, I just want to share that with all you. That's the one dynamic in this whole program. It's right there. So, does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so here's the lease payment again. LP and the gross revenue tax that we're required by statute to collect applies to both of them. So that's how we ensure that lease payment revenue stream stays with you. So here's the illustration I want to review with you. And it is illustrative, but we are billing customers today that show the line items on the bill for this. So this is a customer who's using 1,000 kWh a month and has purchased 4 shares of a community solar project at 7 cents. I can use this because this is the actual PPA cost we have in both Scottsbluff and Venango. We've been very transparent. In fact, when we worked with Cliff on these 2 projects, we made it abundantly clear, and even in the Kearney project, the price has to be transparent because we push the price to our customers who sign up. So in this is an example. It's based on actual billings that are going on today. So you see our customer charge, that's in column C, $19. The energy charge at the standard rate for 1,000 kWh, you see the rate and what it calculates out to be, 0.0891, so it's $89.10. Okay? So then you go to lines 3 and 4. The solar energy charge. The PPA is 7 cents. They bought 4 shares at 150 kWh a share, 600. Simple math, $42. Now you get the base energy credit of the 5.8 cents times the same shares. That's the difference. So for the project in Scottsbluff and Venango, we tell them right now, solar, when we put that in, was a premium. Okay? Because it costs more than what our base energy credit is. So it is a premium. Now, over time, will our base energy credit rise and equal that or surpass that? It may. So when that happens, that becomes a credit on the bill. So they would see a further reduction. Is that clear? Okay, so then we charge the lease payment and the gross revenue tax, the total monthly bill. The difference in this example, which is real, is $8.67. So in Scottsbluff and Venango, it's about $2.17 more on their bill for 1 share. Okay? Now, the Kearney project, their price was 6.25 cents. So you can see how that risk shrinks. Of course, Kearney's project is very big, so they got a lot of economies of scale. And we're working today on Scottsbluff 2, which is a 5 megawatt project, and we're seeing pricing that is even lower than the Kearney project. So questions on the illustrated bill and how we ensure the lease payment revenue stream stays at full capacity for the cities. So, real quickly, this is probably not so much for you, but for, there is a lot of agreements that have to be signed as part of this. The first one is the agreement between us and the developer. It's already in place. Second one is the generation interconnection agreement. Mike is here today. He's taken over that process for us, but we do have to have GIAs for all the projects that are put in. We also have to have GIAs for the buy-sell projects that are behind the meters. We have to have those put in place. The third one is the agreement that we sign with you, the cities. This is the agreement that says if the project isn't fully subscribed, the city agrees to pick up the unsubscribed shares and the incremental difference in the cost of those shares. And again, this is important and needs to be in place so we don't shift that cost to the other communities who decide not to do a community solar project. So, and then finally, everyone that signs up for shares, we have a little side one-page agreement with the end-use customer, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial, on the shares that they're signing up for, when they signed up for, the $50 installment, track that and return that to them on their bill if they're in for 3 years or more. So that's what I have for our program. I spent way too much time up here talking. I'd like to hear more from you. Yes?
Is there anything the legislature you see coming down the road that would impact any of this?
I do not. We've had many discussions with many of the senators. It's our contention as an industry, not just NPPD, that community solar and solar projects behind the meter are thriving in the state of Nebraska. We don't see a need for legislation because we're actively doing what our communities want us to do today. I don't see that happening, Marvel.
What's pushing that legislation?
I think it's just a carryover from maybe a couple of years ago where the senators wanted to jumpstart solar projects in the state of Nebraska, and I think the bigger one was they want the net metering threshold to be higher than the 25 kW that exists today. So I think there was a couple of reasons why it was being pushed. But today, as Cliff has mentioned, there are solar projects across the state of Nebraska that are thriving. And the other thing I would like to state, you know, I was up in Atkinson probably 4 or 5 years ago, and they were looking at a renewable project. It was a wind project. And they're doable, but I think solar projects are much more feasible for communities around the state. They're not near the eyesore, and for wind turbines to be located within your service territories, as solar projects need to be, it'd be very difficult for you to have wind turbines up in your communities. Now there are ways around that, but the solar is a much better renewable avenue for communities that want to go that route.
I'm taking a little different tact on this. How is NPPD planning, but 5 or 10 years down the road, as far as your own generation capability to fit? If there are a lot of different solar farms that go up, how do you fit that into a daytime power supply and a nighttime no power supply on these?
I'll repeat the question, or close to it. How is NPP dealing with maybe 10 years out when penetration of solar becomes so great that they have more generation in the daytime hours and less generation in the evening hours? How are we managing that? And it'll be a challenge, but there's others that have gone before us, particularly out west, that have found a way to coexist with that generation source. We are in the market today, and that's all the dispatchable generation that we would need to buy, which would be the difference between what the solar is producing during the day. We would buy less during the day, and then when it's not producing at night, we'd have to just buy a little more at night. So there are already things in place that help mitigate what you're describing.
What kind of research are you doing as far as battery options or other options to store power?
We, NPPD has looked at the battery storage technology. We have hired up a firm, I want to say it's Power Engineers, to provide us what that might look like on our system. Currently, battery storage technology isn't the cheapest thing to do, but I think our CEO, Pat Pope, is committed to trying to understand how that may be beneficial for us and what the impacts may be. If he can negotiate a certain price, I think he would do a project, but we need to hear from Power Engineers on what that may look like. And they're supposed to provide us a report within the next 2 weeks. What becomes of that, I don't know at this point, but it's a valid question. Battery technology is evolving, maybe not as fast as solar projects and the penetration of solar projects, but there is some value for having both of those together. Yes, Cliff?
A comment and two questions. One of the things that we're seeing right now is a lot of volatility in pricing. In the last 2 months, we've had tax law change, tariff on solar panels, now a tariff on steel and aluminum. From a developer's perspective, you know, it's better to shorten the time frame when all this stuff happens. Is it beneficial to NPPD to have communities talking to you early, or is that just a waste of your time?
Hopefully everyone heard Cliff's question, and we would encourage you to approach us as soon as you think it's a viable option. We have met with numerous communities already in the room on what our program looks like. I would encourage you, if you're thinking about it, get a hold of your account manager or your superintendent or your local manager that's in your communities, and we will show up, explain the program in detail to you, how it will work. It won't be much different than what you heard today, but you know, projects take a while to get in. You know, so if you're thinking you want to drop a project in by 2019, you better start moving on it pretty quick, because we do, by state law, we have to RFP those. We have to make sure that we're getting the lowest possible price possible. We do that through the RFP process. GenPro's very familiar with that. We've worked with them on a number of occasions, but that's the requirement that we're held to prove to our board that yes, we have the most competitive price we can get. So.
And the second question, you go through all that and you get an RFP and you get a price and you don't like the price. At what point is the community bound to move forward?
That's a fair question. If we don't like the price, we haven't encountered that yet, but if we didn't like the price, we would share what the price point is with the community and do the evaluation on what the community is at risk, okay? We have those spreadsheets today. It's pretty simple to pipe in the PPA price and let the communities know what the exposure is, and then we'd work with them on the yes or no on that. So we're just not going to make that decision in a vacuum. We're going to ask the community that's asked us for us, are you comfortable at this price point? If you are, fine. If you're not, we'll stick a fork in it at that point. Steve.
I got multiple questions for you, but with everybody in this room and the interest that's here, you guys staff to manage all of this over the next couple of years as we try and hit your 2019 target date here for a raise?
We will, if there's interest, we'll make sure it happens.
Okay. I'm assuming the purchase power agreement then, that is structured the cost of the system is just structured into there in terms of whether you're talking a fixed array or a non-movable array versus an array that's moving? That's just all part of that PPA?
Yeah, the question is it a fixed array? Is it single access, dual access? That is all part of the RFP process. We will get the bids in accordingly. Sometimes we even ask, give us a price for fixed array, give us a price for single access, double access. But as we've gone through this, it appears single access is a very economical, and we can move that through the process pretty quickly.
My last question, I'm also guessing somewhere in all these agreements it talks about the renewal of the system, repair of the system, replacement of panels, that type of stuff. Does it just go on forever, or is there kind of a full renewal and replacement at some point?
I don't want to steal it. The question is, what about replacement maintenance of the project itself? Molly probably going to touch on that. But when you sign the PPA agreement with the developer is responsible for the output. They have a vested interest to ensure that the project is producing as much as it can, because they would lower their revenue stream if it's not. So there's a built-in incentive for the developer to ensure that the inverters are working, the panels are operating fine, and if one breaks, they would go in and get that replaced, because it's going to lower their revenue stream through the PPA. So
my last question, and I don't know this in depth, but I know out at our water treatment facility, which is where we're looking at putting our larger array, and since it's in proximity, considering doing something behind the meter there, I know at the plant, we monitor that peak wattage really close, and then we're involved in some kind of an agreement there with you guys. And my impression is we're one of the few communities in the state that is doing that. If we were to implement something behind the scenes, does that kind of go away? I don't know how we monitor that.
yeah, and what Steve is talking about is we have a demand waiver program that we send signals out, and Norfolk has been very responsive to that signal because they reduce the billing component on there. There's only, I want to say there's only 4 customers across the state that are on that rate actively, and 3 of those 4 just ignore the signal. You're the one community that's actually responding to the signal. My guess is if you put a project behind the meter, that demand component just almost goes down to whatever your size you're doing the incremental. If it's a 1,000 megawatt demand and you put a 750 kW project, now it's not going to do identical math, but you're going to see substantial savings on the demand side, because that's when you're running the wastewater treatment facility. So.
But when you do a project, you put it on RFP, so it's not just guaranteed to go to Gen Pro. It just, you'll open it up.
For community solar projects, absolutely. For behind-the-meter projects, those are different. Those are at the request of the city or the business that is sitting there. They're not held to some of the same statutes that we are as municipalities and public power districts. But if it's a community solar project, yes, we will RFP it to ensure we get the lowest
How
price.
many bidders did you have in Scottsbluff?
We had 35 bidders in Scottsbluff, and as I mentioned to Molly a little bit earlier, it's not always just the price. Our standard is best evaluated bid, as I'm sure most of your standards are. And we do the due diligence to say, you know, they may have a low bid, but they haven't proven their worth to anyone, and our due diligence says they're a really poor performer. They would not win out on any evaluation that we would do. So, so we're held to some of the same standards you are as municipalities. Okay, I see nothing else. I'll be here all day to answer any questions you may have. I do appreciate you coming, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Cliff.